Okay, so can everyone hear me? Okay. Yes, as I was saying, following on from what Sheila was saying about the process of deinstitutionalisation and then looking at the Hayden project, the Whole Life project was research involving people who, some of whom lived in residential places and also some people who lived within the community. The research that we conducted, we did some interviews with people who were undertaking the Whole Life programme, which was a strength-based approach to therapy, whereby they have a manual that they work through with their therapist. The programme involves 15 modules that they then work through with their therapist at their own rate and pace. So the module itself is open to different pace and structure. You don't have to follow it exactly by the letter, but it's kind of like a needs-driven programme. So the idea is to follow the modules overall, but it can be tailored to specific needs. So it's very much a recovery-based approach, the Whole Life project. And I was one of the researchers involved on the project, and the other two researchers on the project were service users. We felt that was a very important aspect of the project, to be working with service users as opposed to just university-based researchers. These are the areas that I'm going to be looking at, just to give you a quick bit about background, then looking at the views and experiences of the people who we interviewed. So both the people who withdrew from the programme early, but also people who completed the programme. Having a look at the physical materials that we used on the manual, looking at the valuable aspects of the modules, suggestions for programme development, and then conclusions and next steps. So looking at the background of the project, it was very much based on current thinking around the strengths-based approach and recovery approach. And we really wanted to get an understanding of service users' experiences to really get the experiential data and their views and experiences of what it was like to do the programme. And I think the whole ethos of the programme emphasised the personal recovery, that it's very much an individualised, personalised approach within an overall broad structure. So the programme itself, it provides a holistic recovery-based approach, looking at the variety of needs of people, so looking at their whole life as suggested by the title. And it was very much looking at their self-realisation and their self-determination to enable them to take steps towards more independent living. So it was the analogy of a journey and the steps along the journey and the process involved in that journey, as opposed to looking at the end outcome, but very much looking at the processes involved. Another part of the programme was looking at re-asseting people. I think the philosophy among the people who developed the programme was very much that they felt the mental health system as a whole quite often strips people of their assets, and it can be quite a negative experience from that point of view, that they feel bereft and stripped of their assets. So the whole ethos of the programme was the process of re-asseting them. The manual itself was about 250 pages long, but it was important to emphasise that it wasn't manualised therapy, so it wasn't just this big heavy tome that people had to wade through. It was very much a resource manual, really, that people could dip into, use it for their own personal needs, so it wasn't something that they had to work through in a laborious way. And the manual was going to be used jointly between the therapist, sometimes referred to as coach, and also the service user, sometimes referred to as patient. So it's very much an emphasis on a partnership approach as opposed to a top-down approach. It's meant to be collaborative and a partnership. As I said earlier, there was no particular fixed duration of the programme apart from the 15 modules. The pace of work and the duration and intensity were very much tailored to individual needs and to people's own steps of progress that they were making. Obviously it's not always a linear, smooth process, it's quite often a circuitous route that people take, and the programme could be adapted to meet their particular needs. The idea was they met with a therapist once a week for about an hour to have a look at the manual, to work through the modules and to see where they were in relation to the overall structure of the programme. Some people met once a fortnight, so again there was a degree of flexibility depending on their particular needs. And there was very much an emphasis on the therapist facilitating progress and development as opposed to dictating or deciding. It was very much a joint decision process that was encouraged. The work, the manual itself and the whole programme was quite labour intensive actually for both the therapists and the service users. So it wasn't taken particularly lightly. It did involve quite a lot of investment on both sides really. Potential participants who were indifferent to their functional, social and relationship problems were unlikely to make significant progress. That they couldn't really have that approach of indifference. They had to be aware of what they were getting into and they had to be engaged in the process. So the modules that were included in the programme, as I said, there were 15. They covered areas, things like creating new horizons, the journey that service users embark on, the physical environment, communication skills, assertiveness, self-esteem, action planning and managing time. Also change and disappointment. So again, you can see, hopefully it does reflect the title, the whole life programme. There are also modules on anxiety and stress, physical health, understanding and managing money, values and beliefs, and pathways to education and work, leisure and recreation, and personal relationships. So again, the emphasis very much on the whole life, the whole person, and their role in society, perhaps entering education and employment as well. And as Julia was saying earlier about not always taken from society, but hopefully they could then view themselves as making a valuable contribution to society. When we did the interviews, we thought it was best to not record the interviews, so we just made handwritten notes. We thought that could potentially be a less threatening or a more non-threatening approach. The therapists introduced us to their clients, but then the therapists then left when we actually did the interviews, so it was always two interviewers with one interviewee, so to speak. We felt it was important that the therapists weren't there when the interviews took place, so that hopefully they could have a sense of greater freedom to express their views, both positive and negative. So moving on to the views and experiences of the people who withdrew from the programme early. One of the main things that they did say that they found beneficial was, although they did leave the programme early, they had built up good relationships with their therapists. So we found that was an interesting finding, that it wasn't really so much that the relationships with therapists hadn't been good. It was more in relation to their expectations of the programme. We felt, from what they had said that they hadn't been always given sufficient information about what the programme entailed. And some of them thought that they were going to be getting like a therapeutic approach, that it was going to be more of a therapy-based programme. When they actually came to doing it, it was experienced as more of a course, and I think that some of them found the manual, 250 pages, quite daunting and overwhelming. So that, I think, was not conducive to them completing the programme. It's interesting to note that they weren't always clear about the objectives of the programme, so people who withdrew early. And they hadn't really bought into the programme, and they hadn't shown commitment to the programme. So these appear to be the overriding factors as to why they withdrew. So not so much the relationships with therapists, but a slight mismatch between the programme aims and what they were expecting. Although they did withdraw, they did find some of the elements helpful, despite subsequently withdrawing. For example, one service user noted that therapy sessions had helped him with his communication skills, and that he'd become more talkative with his family, including his grown-up children. And he actually said, I communicate with people a lot easier now. I've become more communicative. I think that was a helpful course. So although they withdrew from the course subsequently, they could, on reflection, see that they had benefited in perhaps a non-direct way, and also with the benefit of hindsight, they could see some of the benefits. So then, looking at the views and experiences of the people who completed the programme, the main aspect that we found there was that they had good relationships with their therapists. That seemed to be really pivotal to the success of the programme. They found the various aspects that were dealt on the course relating to budgeting and finding work. That was very much a holistic approach, and they benefited from that because they felt as though they had they were either lacking in experience or they'd lost abilities in those areas for various reasons. So again, this aspect of re-assetting people came into play. One service user disliked the spiritual and philosophical section of the course that was touched on. Because although the module on examining beliefs and values did not focus on religion per se, it seemed to be interpreted as religious. I suppose when you say things like spiritual, philosophical beliefs, it can sometimes be interpreted as being religious. So again, I think perhaps a greater clarity would need to be sought on future programmes. The actual manual itself, as I say, 250 pages long. Some of them did regard that the tasks that were set each week, they came to conceptualise that as homework. But it wasn't meant in that spirit at all. It was meant to be a resource. But I think some of them, they came to view it in that way. Although one of the people who did complete the course, reflecting back on her expectations prior to the programme, we thought this was a very interesting quote when she explained that she felt as though the expectations of the course hadn't been made clear to her. And she said the programme had been sold to me as therapy, but it was a course. I felt cheated. So again, it's this distinction between therapy and a course that I think needs to be made clear to potential participants in the future. Other people, conversely, really liked the set tasks that they were given by their therapists. So again, it shows the diversity amongst the people undertaking the programme as to what suits their particular needs and their different stages in their process of recovery. They also compared the whole life programme to previous services that they'd experienced, and they, especially things like cognitive behavioural therapy, they felt as though it didn't clash with the whole life programme, but that it complemented it. So again, it's to see the complementary element of the various different services, that perhaps that they could work in conjunction with each other as opposed to clashing or pulling in different directions. The most prevalent theme to emerge from service users was that the fact that they felt they had grown in confidence and self-esteem as a result of participating in the programme. That came through in most of the interviews actually. And more than 2/3 of the people completing the programme explained that they'd gained confidence and better social functioning. So again, it's looking at the social functioning aspect of the programme and how people can be equipped and have strategies for dealing with the social world and social support, as opposed to looking at it from a purely medicalised point of view. For example, one of the quotes was, I was withdrawn and bored sitting at home, scared to go out. I'm back to normal. I've gained confidence, made friends, and I've been helped a great deal. So again, I think the language of optimism and hope and the gains in self-confidence really were coming through when we analysed their narratives. And another person said, I was inspired, which in turn built up my confidence. I was given encouragement and support to continue and shown that things are possible. So again, very much echoing the strength-based approach and the recovery approach. The relationships with therapists, as I indicated earlier, seem to be pivotal to the success of the programme, and they very much valued the therapists, the people who completed the course. They were asked to describe their therapists, and they came out with lots of different adjectives, things like supportive, brilliant, great, helpful, friendly, empathetic, kind, patient, flexible, polite. So hopefully that is resonant of the strength-based approach, and is hopefully a contrast to, say, like a top-down model or a medicalised model, but very much a partnership approach. Also, therapists were particularly valued when they were easy to talk to and empathetic. Also good at listening skills, I think, was very important, and good at explaining. And they were very skilled, some of the therapists, in drawing out information from the patient. So I think that takes quite a lot of experience and skill and sometimes training to draw out the information that the patients already hold, and the skills and experience and knowledge that the patients already have, but perhaps they don't recognise in themselves that they have it. So I think the therapists are key in drawing out that information. And they also describe the therapists as being good listeners, positive approach, able to build up trust, sharing feelings and having humour. So quite a contrast to, say, like a medicalised top-down approach. And I think quite a few of the people who completed the programme, they saw it as a welcome change from previous services that they'd had. One person in particular said, it's been a positive experience from the start. Seeing someone regularly and following a well-written and well-structured guide was good. And also the pathways to employment and they also had sessions about job interviews where they did like mock job interviews. They were seen by several as very useful and very useful in realising independent living. So that was their goal that they had in mind, several of them. So looking at the use of physical materials, again looking at the manual, there was a divergence of opinions there. Some people were very receptive towards it and other people found it slightly overwhelming. In the manual there was a tree of life diagram that people were asked to look at where they saw themselves at the beginning of the programme and then at various stages throughout the programme. And most of the service users found this visualisation and verbal consideration of their progress over time was very beneficial. Obviously, lots of people work in lots of different ways, and I think sometimes the visual representation can be very helpful. In relation to where they saw themselves on the tree, 9 out of the 13 service users who completed the programme perceived that they had progressed up the tree as a result of undertaking the whole life therapy sessions. So they made various comments like, I was at the bottom of the tree when I started, now I'm halfway up. Another person said, I think I'm somewhere near the top now, I've made progress. And someone else said, further up, but hopefully still climbing. So again, that is indicative of the ongoing process. They don't see it as that they've arrived at their destination yet, but that they're still climbing. So that ongoing nature. Some people liked the resources and the tables in the manual. Other people, it was a bit of a turn. So again, it's good to accommodate various different people's strengths and weaknesses and needs. Oh yes, one interviewee explained how they'd used small laminated cards in the therapy sessions. Her therapist had made small laminated cards which she carried around with her, which gave like practical advice and guidance. So she found these cards very helpful. It was something that she could like carry around with her and like use as a resource when she felt the need for it. We did also find a small minority that they might have literacy needs. So they might struggle with the literacy element. And they could struggle with the written work element. So again, that's something to be taken into account. I think as Julia was saying earlier about some of the people with literacy needs, so that's something always important to find out. Looking at the valuable aspects of the modules, they felt very much that it equipped them to be more assertive in getting their views across. So it's getting that balance between being passive and aggressive, but hopefully finding that midway point of being assertive. And that wasn't just within informal settings, but also formal settings, to also make that distinction, especially if they'd been excluded from society and if they'd been at home a lot of the time. To get that assertive communication back was really important. The first module that focused on dreams and aspirations had been experienced as particularly inspiring by some of the participants. One of them said, from the very first module, I learnt it was okay to have dreams, anything was possible. I had dreams before I was ill. I remembered them and connected with them. The inspirational quotes lifted me. So I think that the narratives really were quite poignant, that they did have a lot of these hopes and aspirations that were perhaps sort of hidden or locked inside, and it was a case of accessing them and unlocking them through the process of the programme. As previously mentioned, the module on understanding and managing money was also particularly valuable.
and they were encouraged to save up for items and buy items that they'd previously been unable to do, or perhaps other people had made decisions for them in that area. So again, it was giving them back more control over their lives in relation to spending money and things like that, and making budgetary decisions. One person, for example, said electric bills and the like. I couldn't have thought of this stuff much before I did the whole life programme. So it's quite often things that might be taken for granted in the everyday sort of busy lives that we lead, that people who do experience schizophrenia perhaps have become less acquainted with their recent experiences. The personal relationships module was cited as favourable in helping service users to address their own relationships, and this also involved being more relaxed. I think a lot of them were lacking confidence. Then when it did come to personal relationships, perhaps they weren't sufficiently relaxed, and I think the module helped them in that respect. And also guidance on different ways to make and keep friends was also found to be productive and applicable to some service users' social life. So the social aspect of the programme also came through, as the whole life title suggests. So programme development aspects. A small minority of service users wanted to see particular areas incorporated in future programmes. These included issues that would analyse drugs and alcohol, sexual relationships, panic attacks, hyperventilation and lethargy. So out of the people who were interviewed, they were the themes that were identified. Also, they would have welcomed using examples of people with mental health issues and their achievements as an exemplar of practice, so that they could actually see how some other people had perhaps gone through the process and use them as an example of good practice, to perhaps something to aspire to themselves. 10 of the 13 people who we interviewed who had successfully completed the programme expressed an interest in having a follow-up session perhaps 6 months after the programme had finished. So 10 out of 13 is obviously quite a large majority. So again, that relates to perhaps a programme when it finishes. Sometimes it can seem quite abrupt to some people, so perhaps factoring in a follow-up session or follow-up contact I think is always valuable. One respondent was unsure about the merits of a follow-up session, explaining that he wouldn't want to drag up the same issues again. So I think that's quite interesting again about the diversity of the different approaches and needs. Most of them were keen to recommend the whole life programme to others. So looking at conclusions and next steps, the programme, I think, very much emphasised the holistic approach to dealing with people with schizophrenia, and also engaging service users' voices and looking at recovery narratives. And it was interesting that the people we interviewed, they were actually really pleased to be interviewed. They really sort of welcomed that experience of being interviewed and talking about their views and how they'd experienced the programme. So I think for them to sort of be listened to in that way was seen as very beneficial. And I think one of the main features that we found was this increasing confidence, hope and optimism, and that they're key features of the process and outcomes of recovery-based approaches. And also to be respectful and flexible in the approach. So to not have this sort of rigid application, but to have that flexibility is also really key. What else was important? Oh yeah, I think they recognised, some people were very good at recognising the non-linear aspect of recovery, and they could recognise that perhaps with the help of their therapists, whereas other people, particularly among the people who didn't complete the programme, they felt as though sometimes they weren't always making progress, and because they couldn't really sort of recognise that recovery isn't always a long linear process, they sort of lost hope, and they felt as though they weren't achieving anything. So I think perhaps sometimes they need to be sort of facilitated in seeing the progress that they have made. It's quite often small, subtle steps, but if they can't see that, then it's difficult for them to see the whole point of the programme. So I think therapists sometimes, if they could help people see that the small steps they are taking, I think that's really important. Also, some of the therapists whose people who withdrew from the programme, they felt quite a lot of personal responsibility for the people who did withdraw. They felt that they were perhaps at fault, or they might have done something wrong, but it's obviously not their fault, and but I think it was just showed their commitment to the programme, and obviously to their patients, that they were so keen for them to complete the course that they took on some of the sort of feelings of guilt and responsibility. So I think the whole recovery approach is very much based around partnership and looking at recovery as small steps in perhaps a circuitous route, rather than just looking at recovery as an end outcome. Some of the discussions that we had afterwards, which were interesting, that when some of the patients met with their therapists, if they'd had a good week and there weren't any sort of immediate problems that the patient had, we felt it was important for this to not be seen as like a fallow week or an empty week, that this could be used as a fertile or productive week to kind of like dig deeper and ascertain what has gone well that week, why is that week relatively problem-free, what's worked well for them. So times like this should be regarded as fertile and not fallow, and made effective use of. So I think that was very interesting. It again relates back to the flexibility of the programme. They tended to meet once a week or once a fortnight. And if they did have a good week, it wasn't a case of, okay, off you go, I'll see you next week, but to actually use that as an opportunity for digging a bit deeper. In terms of next steps, patients, we thought when we discussed the findings, thought it was a good idea for them to be interviewed before new programmes started, to make them aware of the expectations, and to make it clear to them that it's quite likely that the programme may entail them going out of their comfort zone. So for them to be aware of that in a measured and supportive way, but to clarify the expectations of the programme, and also the expectations of the therapist and the patient. And more information was going to be given right at the outset. We also found that the selection of therapists is crucial. It was a small minority, but some therapists did deliver the programme with sort of slight indifference, we found. It was a minority, but obviously that's quite crucial on a programme such as this. And some of them, a small minority, delivered the programme with a sense of rigidity, which wasn't in keeping with the philosophy and ethos of the programme, which was emphasising flexibility and adaptation according to individual needs. So we thought the selection of therapists was crucial. And in discussions that we had, it was felt that therapists were going to be handpicked for subsequent programmes because they seem to be pivotal to the success or failure, really. And the last conclusion is that they were going to select gold-plated therapists. They found that that was crucial to the success of the programme, that they were going to be very careful, and obviously it's got implications for perhaps a skills base and future training for therapists, but if they can get these therapists that are potentially gold-plated, that would hopefully help the success of future programmes. That's it.
One question, gold-plated therapists, do you mean that in a sense of good grades, or I don't understand that term, I'm sorry, but...
Yeah, just sort of for them to be like really effective therapists, like they'll be hand-picked. It's not as though they'll sort of be using any therapist, but it'll be like quite a rigorous selection process for the therapists. They'll really identify people who can work well on the programme and who will have effective skills for working with the patients.
What qualities do those therapists need to have?
Well, things like I've said about good listening skills.
That's something you expect from every therapist.
But does it always happen? And also like drawing out information, drawing out the strength in the actual person that might sort of be dormant or residual in the patient, but to have those skills, to be, seeing and listening with your brain as opposed to just your ears and your eyes, and to be sort of like buying into the whole recovery and strength-based approach as well.
I'm a bit confused. Maybe I missed some things in the beginning, but why talking about patients and therapists? I mean, isn't this is this in hospital, or, I mean, because it's kind of medical terminology, or...
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier about sometimes they're called a coach and a participant. But when we came to writing up the research, we did go back to the traditional language of patient and therapist. I mean, it's not really my subject area as I'm a researcher. I don't want to sort of shirk responsibility, but I was working with professors in the field who, I don't know, in terms of terminology, what's politically acceptable.
Well, he was a psychiatrist, but we are using, when we talk about relationship in recovery, we are talking about coaching style. Coaching means that you're not actually a therapist. You are someone who encourages another person to do what they want to do. Very different relationship.
That's why it's a bit confused, probably.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, it's called Whole Life Therapy Programme.
It sounds like a nightmare. Literally says, of course not this one. I mean, of course not this one, but I mean, the concept of whole life therapy, it's nightmare for me. I don't know. It's but again, yes, you are more in evaluation.
Yes, yeah. Whether they'll change their language and terminology for subsequent programmes, I don't know, but it's a very good point when you start analysing the language surrounding different roles and responsibilities.
So you just about terminology.
many of things that you have said, and I mean, it does give us parallel to the kind of personal planning that we have developed on the basis of what David was gave us to work on. And although, yes, there are also some differences, yes? Because obviously if somebody's got a complex situation in life, needs to think about many things in a way that he would express desires and find the support to do that. So I mean, and building on the strength rather than the weaknesses and so on. But then I'm thinking, well, so okay, it's like many things. Yeah, it is in the same paradigm, definitely. So, but what are the? Then I'm thinking, what are the differences? What are the differences? And the major difference to me is that, well, maybe I'm not sure. This is now I'm asking because, of course, I don't. It's what I read, what you have sent in advance, and we have put it on the internet, so everybody can see what your article. It's to me, I'm not sure whether, I mean, for our method that is we have developed, there is it is both very broad and, let's say, holistic and wholesome or whatever, comprehensive, but it gives us also opportunity to center or to work on the goals that person sets and forget some other things that he's not interested in working. Here I'm not sure whether, I mean, we have very similar kind of list of topics what could be addressed, but not necessarily should be addressed. Yes? So it is because, of course, if you're working with somebody on improving his life, definitely it is this can be really partial and task-centered, but also it can be broader and more comprehensive. So I'm wondering, so there has to be kind of a freedom of, or liberty of action, but also of conversation on on working on what is important and relevant for the person. But I don't know. So this is so basically what I'm asking, what myself and the audience and you in particular, what would be the difference, or is there a meaningless difference, or is it a practice that developed parallelly and is very similar and actually doesn't? It's just a different name or some details that are not so important. And this is, and more specific question is that do you need to address all of the topics in the on the list?
Well, I think there was flexibility in the 15 modules. I'm not sure if, I think they sort of touched on all of them, but they could spend longer on ones, obviously, that were more relevant to them. And sort of less time on ones that weren't so relevant. I think that's where some of the therapists, they were sort of less flexible and kind of like not adapting it to the service user patient. Difficult. So, but I see what you mean about, you know, could they, you saying, like, could they skip particular modules, or I'm not sure if they skipped any of them.
I wonder whether to do this type of work in a group would have been more advantageous. Because a group could give a lot of support to each other, and also people would learn about the repertoire of how other people solve similar problems. Also, it is moving away from the patient, or very much, when it is in a group situation. I understand the wish to offer individual support, but this can happen that people, the coach or the trainer, would be available to individuals if the need arises. And a group could give a lot more in terms of solidarity, quite a lot of things. And also turn it really into a course rather than therapy. So I wonder.
Yeah, I think that distinction between course and therapy is really interesting, because there was that one participant who said, oh, you know, it was sold to me as therapy, but it was a course and I felt cheated, so it's kind of like this mismatch of expectations.
200 pages, isn't it?
250.
250,
So it is quite a bit more structured than
Yes.
what we do. But this, what Shula was saying, reminds me of a practice that was tried out in Slovenia a few years ago in Sonček. Late Kazanika, she was developing this life planning, which was a group exercise where people were sitting in the group, and which were good part was that also people who would contribute to the plan were invited and sat with the person who was doing the plan. But how we have it, and this for the reasons that you have said, it looked very good, and I think this a legitimate way of planning and considering the life and so on. However, we have opted as a major method to remain with the initially individual format, so people can express the desires and on their own, and then with the support of the care planner, personal care planner, to present it to the team conference, and then make it a group issue. So it's because then it becomes, okay, these are my desires, and what can you contribute? I'm willing to contribute, and that is different when you have a group on the onset, when you don't know really what you want in your life, and then the group can interfere with giving you the hints what your desires could be.
I'm also thinking this is a very expensive way in terms of use of personnel. And a group is a much more, in terms of the use of resources, it's a much better way.
Yeah, how long does it take?
It's a very long process.
Yeah, I think it's over a year. about a year, isn't it?
It's about a year.
About 1 year.
A year, yeah.
Weekly.
Weekly or
Either
fortnightly?
weekly or fortnightly. I think it's even possible to train service users to do it to each other as a period exercise.
And how long is one session? What would be the length of the session? I forgot, sorry.
I think it was an hour.
So it doesn't take much longer than an average time needed to make a really good personal plan. Except it is longer time. You would need about that time to do the whole process to make a really good, meaningful plan.
A year.
50 hours.
You
Yeah.
need a year.
No, a year.
No,
3 months, but 50 hours
Yes.
in terms of
But you
hours.
can use 50 hours in a variety of ways. Okay, yeah. Thank you very much, Michelle. What do we want to do next?
Have a break.
Important.
Tomorrow we will have the shared decision.
Yes.
I'm having the first report today.
Well,